Hi there, my name's Sheva Hosseinzadeh and I'm a commercial real estate agent and a principal here at Coldwell Banker Commercial Blair in Long Beach. A common question I get as a realtor is, how do you read a lease agreement? And what I'm going to be going through today is what is called a standard commercial AIR lease agreement. This is the commonly used lease contract that we see day in and day out with our business. So if you're a business owner and you're looking to lease a property, a commercial property, you're likely going to come across this lease contract. And I'm just going to go through some basics today on how to read this contract and what certain items refer to. And I hope this information can be helpful for you as you're looking into expanding or relocating your business and signing a new lease. This information should be somewhat useful. So today, for today's purposes, we're using a multi-tenant net lease agreement. However, there are single tenant leases, there are multi-tenant gross leases, there's different types of leases. It depends on the project type and the type of real estate that you're renting. But for today, we're going to be using a multi-tenant net lease. This is the very first page of the lease agreement. And so typically what you're going to see in paragraph 1.1 is who is the landlord, who is the lessee. Then you go into paragraph 1.2 about the project, the square footage, the type of space that you're renting, the county that it's located in. Sometimes if there's parking, paragraph 1.2b will talk about the parking, whether it's existing, whether it's reserved, whether it's not reserved, whether it's paid, usually would go into this section. Paragraph 1.3, this is really important. This is the lease term. How many years are you actually signing? This is going to be the start date and the end date. This is going to be the years, months with the start date and the end date of your actual term of your lease agreement. If you're going to have early possession, meaning that you're going to take the space before the commencement date of your lease, that time frame would be identified here in 1.3 and what that early possession would look like. In 1.5, this is your base rent. What are you paying for your initial year's lease term? This rent only applies to year one, and it'll be paid on the first generally of each month. And you would note on the date of which that rent is due, which typically would match the term of the lease agreement itself. If this box is checked here, which 99% of the time it is, that means that there is a rent adjustment that's going to be applied starting from years 2 and on. And I'm going to show you that contract and what that looks like in just a minute. But this would state that, again, you're going to have rental increases that go into effect after your base year. In this particular case, there's common area operating expenses. This would note how much and what the percentage is. This percentage is really important because what that percentage applies to is the square footage of the space in which you're occupying in comparison to the square footage of the total building. And that comes out to how much of a percentage of the common area expenses you're responsible for. So this is an important number and something to make sure that it's calculated correctly, because if there's an increase in common areas, that percentage is what's going to be applied to what you owe as your portion of the overall expense. This section, a lot of people confuse and misunderstand, but paragraph 1.7 says base rent and other monies due upon lease execution. This is the money that you pay when your lease is signed, and that's it. It does not apply to future payments. It doesn't apply to your regular monthly payments. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. This is strictly when you sign your lease agreement, what is the base rent that you're paying and what period does it apply to? If there's common area expenses, how much and what period does that apply to? Your security deposit, which is going to range for every person based on your financials. And if there's any other expense, like a utility expense that you'd be paying to the landlord, you would identify that here and then the month that it would apply to. Typically, this money's due is for money that is paid for the first month of the lease term, but it can be other things as well. So this is strictly, again, monies due upon execution. Then we get to paragraph 1.8. This is the use, so whatever agreed use that would be identified there. If there's any real estate agents in the transaction from a lessor-lessee perspective, that would be noted here. And then we get to the guarantors. This is very important. Every landlord typically requires a guarantee of lease from one person or more people that are personally going to guarantee the lease agreement. And those names of those individuals as an individual or as individuals would be noted here in paragraph 1.111. And also there's a separate contract form that would be attached that I'll review with you in just a minute that would be added on separately to the contract. We have an addendum here section, which we typically would have an addendum, meaning other terms outside of the lease that get negotiated. If there's a site plan, current set of rules or regulations, a work letter, other things, those would be checkmarked off and identified here. And that's primarily the lease. So the first page is usually what gets filled in with all the terms. The rest of the contract itself is pre-printed language. Still something you should review. But the most important thing is to focus on that first page and make sure that those terms match what you agree to. Then we're going to go over to the rent adjustment. So after year one, you're going to have a rental increase. And this page would be added onto the lease. It's the rent adjustment page. It's going to identify the date again, who the lessor and the lessee are, property address, the paragraph that it's referencing. And there's a couple of ways that rent adjustments can happen. There's a consumer price index, so the rent adjustment can be made based off the CPI. Not as commonly used, but still an option. There's a fixed rent, so you could just put in a percentage, which sometimes is more common, but the most common one is the fixed rental adjustment here at the bottom, where the landlord is going to say starting in year two, they're going to identify those dates or months. Your rent is going to increase to this dollar amount. Starting in year three, your rents are going to increase to this dollar amount. So the rent that we saw identified on the first page of the lease agreement, again, only applies to year one. The rent adjustment page applies to years 2 and on. If you sign a 5-year lease, it'll be from 2 to 5. If it's a 3-year lease, it'll have years 2 and 3. So that's the rent adjustment page. That's identifying your rental increases. The next document we'll be reviewing is the option to extend. Excuse me. Okay. This document, if after your original term, let's say you sign a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease or a 2-year lease, you have the option to extend your term for an additional 2, 3, or 5 years. This document would be added to your lease agreement. It's going to again identify the date, who the lessor or the lessee are. It's going to have the address. It's going to identify how many options you have. Do you have one option to extend, 2 options to extend? And then how many months are in each option that'll be provided to you. And typically you have to exercise your option within a 6 to 9 month period, meaning no less than 6 months before the term expires, but no earlier than 9 months before the term expires. And so those two timelines usually are identified here, so you almost have a 3-month window to notify an owner that you're going to be renewing their lease. And then typically, as on the rent adjustment page, you see here for the option, you're also going to have to identify what your rental increases are going to be in the option term. We have CPI here, which is the consumer price index. We have fixed rent again, which again could be just a percentage. We have fair market value, which some landlords would prefer to say, well, now that it's been 5 years, I want to know what the fair market value rent is for my space, and they would charge that for the option term. Or again, what we have, which is more commonly used, is the fixed rental adjustments. Well, they'll again identify the date in which your option goes into effect, and then they're going to identify what your rental rate will be for that option term. So if you decide to extend your term and stay at that property for an extended period of time, you should know already what your rental income or rental payments would be to the landlord. The next document we're going to go through is an addendum. My addendum is blank today because there's nothing noted here, but I just want you to be aware of what this document is and what goes on here. Again, you fill out the top portion with the property address, lessor and lessee, but this is any other item that's negotiated outside of the original pre-printed lease agreement. If it has to do with tenant improvements, rent abatement, if you're negotiating something that the landlord is going to be offering to you as part of you renewing your or going into the lease space, all of that would be noted here. So you would have this entire page filled out, and it's important to always look for an addendum and make sure you review it in detail, because this page here can get commonly missed because it's kind of towards the middle of the lease and most people don't understand the importance of it. But everything else that is negotiated would be noted here, and it's important to read this form. So we're almost to the end here. The guarantee of the lease form, I mentioned this earlier. Most landlords require at least one individual or two individuals to personally guarantee the lease agreement. If you're going to personally guarantee the lease, you're going to also have this document that'll be tied to the lease agreement. It'll state the lessee's information, lessor's information, property address, and then the names of the individuals that are going to be guarantors. And then this document details out what is your obligation as a guarantor. What happens if you don't pay your rent? What liabilities are you incurring, and what remedies the landlord has to go after you personally if there's a default that's going to exist on the lease, and more specifically a default that has to do with rent not being paid. So that's the guarantee of lease form. The last form that would be in the lease agreement generally is an agency disclosure. The realtors are legally obligated to include this page. It talks about who is representing who, the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships, who is your agent and who is the landlord's agent, and what their jobs are to both of you, and the fiduciary responsibility that they have to represent you. So this is not really as important for you. You should definitely read it, but it's just by law we have to have it as part of the contract, and you will see it as part of the lease agreements when you're going through those documents. So this is a high level overview of a lease agreement. I hope this information was helpful. Definitely have a real estate agent look over the documents, or your real estate agent, but more importantly, you need to have an attorney, a real estate attorney that understands these contracts, can review them on your behalf, and really guide you as to whether or not there needs to be changes so that you're protected as a business owner. So I hope this information was helpful. Again, if you need anything commercial related, please reach out to our offices. My name again is Sheva Hosseinzadeh. Please subscribe, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thanks so much.